Today's video is sponsored by Nobility.co.uk, the leading company in selling legal titles in the United Kingdom. Get a 10% discount in any purchase by mentioning Death Row. Two inmates, from two different states but destined to die the same day, Casey McCarther in Alabama and David Santiago Renteria in Texas, were both executed on the 16th of November 2023. Talking about what brings both men to death row in the first place, starting with Casey McCarther. On a cold day in the winter of 1993, Casey McWhorter carried out the plot that he had been conspiring to commit for nearly a month, to rob and murder Ed Williams. Weeks earlier, Lee Williams had asked Casey McWhorter and Daniel Minor to murder his father, Ed Williams. McWhorter, who lived a life that had been, in his own words, going deeper and deeper into an evil hole, was more than happy to oblige his friend after being informed that he would be able to steal a bunch of pistols and a bunch of money from Ed Williams in exchange for taking his life. After repeated discussions and careful planning, the murder plot was finally put into action on Thursday, February 18, 1993. In the mid-afternoon of that day, Casey McWhorter and Daniel Minor were dropped off nearby Ed Williams' house. Knowing that Williams would not get home from work until later that evening, they entered his empty house and went to work. For the next few hours, Casey McWhorter and Daniel Minor busied themselves gathering up various items to steal and readying for their ambush attack. As part of the preparations, McWhorter manufactured homemade silencers for two .22 caliber rifles, test-firing them into a mattress to ensure everything was in proper working order. And then the duo laid in wait. When Ed Williams arrived home, he immediately noticed that things were amiss. Spotting Daniel Minor, he confronted him, grabbed his rifle, and pulled it away. As Minor panicked, Casey McWhorter calmly stepped out of the shadows and shot Williams, who yelled out in pain and fell to the ground. McWhorter, whose rifle had jammed, picked up Minor's rifle and continued shooting Williams as he desperately tried to crawl to the safety of a bathroom. Kicking the bathroom door to keep Williams from shutting it, McWhorter picked back up his rifle, unjammed it, and fired a final shot into Williams's head. Ed Williams was shot a total of 11 times by Casey McWhorter. Examination of his body later found that bullets struck several of his internal organs, including his liver, kidney, heart, and brain. Additionally, his aorta and pulmonary artery were pierced, causing half a gallon of blood to accumulate in his chest cavity. At trial, overwhelming evidence of Casey McWhorter's guilt was presented by the prosecution, including his own detailed confession. He was convicted of capital murder by a jury of his peers and, in accordance with the jury's recommendation, sentenced to death for his heinous crime. McWhorter said his childhood and resentment against his father affected him in a way where he always sought attention, even if that was bad attention. It was a really mean cycle that I didn't know how to communicate to people. I didn't know how to fix in my own head. It put me in some really bad situations. When he was sentenced to death and hauled south down I-65 in a police car, McWhorter said all he could think was, "Oh my God, I'm going to death row." The first night he spent there, McWhorter said he panicked about big, scary murderers breaking into his cell to kill him. But then he listened and heard other men on death row talking and even laughing, being what he called everyday people. I thought, did they carry me to the wrong place? But then he listened and heard other men on death row talking and even laughing, being what he called everyday people. I thought, did they carry me to the wrong place? It took a bit of time to adjust and to grow up behind bars, but McWhorter did. It was his grandmother who finally convinced him that he was better than the actions that put him there, and it was time to act like it. After the Alabama Department of Corrections took away college classes for people who were sentenced to death and life with parole, McWhorter became a bookworm, reading anything he could put his hands on. He started writing letters. Casey Allen McWhorter was executed on the 16th of November 2023, at the age of 49 after spending 31 years on Alabama's death row. The drapes of the media witness room opened at 6:30 p.m. McWhorter was lying in a bed partially covered by a tightly drawn white sheet. His head and torso were slightly elevated. He was lying cruciform, with both arms facing palm up. Restraints for his body were on top of the sheet. 2 IV lines came from a small window in the back wall of the death chamber. One appeared to enter his right arm near the inside of his elbow, and the other appeared to enter his left arm at the inside of his left elbow. Warden Terry Rabin read the death warrant and governor's order of execution. McWhorter was given the opportunity to say last words. "I would like to say to my mother and family that I love them," he said. "To the victim's family, I'm sorry and I hope they find peace. I am aware that a habitual abuser of women is carrying out this procedure." He declined breakfast and lunch and had a final meal of Turtles candy before his execution. At 6:33 p.m. McWhorter closed his eyes. A minute later he shifted his legs, clenched his fists and moved his fingers. He was approached by his spiritual advisor. At 6:35 p.m. he was moving his fingers. And at 6:37 p.m. he raised his head, made a yawning motion, appeared to gasp and his eyes rolled into the back of his head. At 6:39 p.m. he appeared to stop breathing. His spiritual advisor made the sign of the cross. A few minutes after a corrections officer inside the death chamber bent to McWhorter's ear and loudly called his name. The officer then touched his face and pinched the inside of his right arm. At 6:47 p.m. the drapes to the media witness room were drawn. McWhorter's official time of death was given as 6:56 p.m. On the same day in Texas, David Santiago Renteria was executed. Born November 22, 1969, David Santiago Renteria, a Native American, Renteria abducted Alexandra Flores on November 18, 2001, outside a Walmart in El Paso, where she was shopping with her family. Her body was found the next day by employees from a doctor's office 15 miles away from the store. Police found her nude, partially burned body, with a plastic bag over her head. Renteria was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death in September 2003. Renteria testified that his savage murder of Flores was because a gang made him do it. He said that if he didn't do it, then the gangs would go after his family. A medical examiner testified that Flores had 2 bruises on her skull, indicating she was struck on both sides of her head. The examiner continued to say Flores died from asphyxia due to manual strangulation and that she was dead when she was burned. Renteria was arrested the next month. He told police that a gang member named Flaco and other members of the Azteca prison gang that originated in the El Paso prison system were primarily responsible for Flores' murder. Renteria had a history with law enforcement before the Flores murder. In 1992, he was convicted of the offense of indecency with a child. In the course of the Flores trial, the victim of the 1992 incident testified that Renteria molested her at the age of 7. Renteria was a convicted sex offender on probation when he was seen on a Walmart security video leaving the store with Flores. On November 20, 2003, Renteria, David Santiago received the death sentence. The month November is very significant in Renteria, David Santiago's life. He was born in the month of November. He committed the crime in the month of November. He was convicted and sentenced to death in the month of November, and again he died in the month of November. David Santiago Renteria, 53, was put to death by lethal injection at the state penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas, for the heinous killing of Alexandra Flores, who was brutally murdered November 2001. Before the execution, Renteria prayed, sang and asked for forgiveness. "I'm sorry for all the wrongs I have done. And for those who have called for my death, who are about to murder me, I forgive you," he said. On Thursday night in the room known as the death chamber, the child killer stood next to a spiritual advisor as he prayed and chanted hymns in both Spanish and English. Looking at the victim's relatives, he said, "There is not a day that goes by that I do not think about the fateful events of that day and what transpired. There are no words to describe what you're going through, and I understand that." Renteria's sister and a friend, who were also present, watched through another window, as he told them he was good, strong, before saying his final goodbyes. "I love you all, I truly do. I'll see you in the next life," he said. After he was injected with a lethal dose of the powerful sedative pentobarbital, Renteria began reciting the Lord's Prayer. The drug took about 11 minutes to go into effect. "Our Father, who art in heaven," Renteria said before he paused and said what would be his final words, "I taste it." After 2 loud breaths and a snore, his body went limp. At 7:11 p.m. Central Standard Time, he was pronounced deceased. Renteria's death is the 8th and final execution in Texas this year. Thank you for watching Death Row.